Welcome to the open air.
Hi. We're back again doing another podcast.
Hey, that's us.
Yeah.
So, today on my mind is been thinking about aviation.
Usually.
Well, every day I think about aviation. That's,
Yes.
I guess that's not revelational. Now, where I'm
No.
going with that, though, I've been listening to a book on Audible called As a Man Thinketh, which is it was written in the early 1900s, right? And the concept of the book at the time was pretty revelational. And it has withstood the test of time. Like, it is still a really good self-help book today, right? The information in that book is still relevant today. It's a little harder to read because they tried to make it sound very fancy.
Well, and their language was just different in the early 1900s as well.
Old English.
Old American English. Old American English.
Old American English.
There we go.
So it's complicated. It's kind of like reading the King James version of the Bible, right? Like, it's just
kind of
unnecessarily complicated.
sort of. It reminded me, the little bit that I listened to with you reminded me of like Charles Dickens type writing.
Oh, a little bit, yeah.
It was kind of on that level of
Yes. Almost a
inflated
Yoda-esque element to it, where they scramble their sentences into a syntax that we're not used to today. Right. So it's been a fun read or listen, I guess. I'm reading it via audio.
Yes.
So, but the real point of the book is like a person is the sum of their thoughts.
Yes.
Right. So, and it goes further to say that your circumstances in life are not by chance, but they are because of all of your thoughts have become actions, and all of those actions have become part of your character.
Right.
And that is what got you to where you are today.
Right. And I think there's a modern version of that talking about, what you fear most is what you attract kind of thing. So if it's on your mind more, you're more likely to run into it. That's kind of like that. What is that thing where you like hear a word one time and you'd never heard it before, and then you hear it everywhere, or you see that same car everywhere?
Oh yeah. It's,
I can't remember
what
that's
called. It's not the Mandela
called.
effect.
No.
Oh
man, that's gonna bug me now. I
yes.
think it's a German word. Like.
Yes. If anybody knows,
yeah.
Comment below. Let us know.
Yeah, because we're gonna look it up after this because it's gonna drive me nuts.
Well, and that way everybody else will know and see it down below too. So, we appreciate that.
Yes.
So anyway, some of your thoughts, the sum of your thoughts, right, become your actions, and then your actions become part of your character, right? So if you think positive thoughts and you think about bounty and being plentiful and wealth and just, generally joyful, happiness, appreciation, grace is a really big one in our family, right? We try to exercise a lot of grace because we're all human. We all make mistakes, and we all deserve a lot of grace, right? And so,
well, that kind of plays into the attitude of gratitude thing. If you're looking for things to be thankful for, you'll be thankful for more.
That's a good one. I like that.
Where if you're looking for things to be unhappy about, you're more likely to be unhappy.
Right. And the book talks about that. That if you're constantly negative and running things down or whatever, that's the mindset that you're building. And so then you're going to be unhappy, right? So I think the book literally says, and it says it in a different way, so I'm paraphrasing, but all of your happy thoughts, right, become happiness. All of your negative thoughts become unhappiness, right? Sadness or anger in your body. So you should purify your thoughts. You should be more intentional with what you're thinking, right? Be more joyful, be more appreciative, be, more
Right,
gracious with your thoughts, right? And so I've often taught this like youth group or at church, a lot of, road rage and people and drivers. Oh, this dumb driver, the George Carlin has a skit where he talks about idiots and maniacs, where the person that's driving faster than you is a maniac and the person that's driving slower than you is an idiot, right? And that's just a general perception thing around people. And if you think about it, right, he's not wrong, because we all think that way at some level. But yet, if you consider the person, you don't know what that person is going through, right? Maybe they just lost a loved one. Maybe they're late for work and they're concerned they're going to get fired, or maybe they just got broken up in a relationship, or maybe they just got a new relationship and they're on their way to go see that person, and they're experiencing a devastating loss, and so they want to get there to be there for them. Like, you don't know what people are going through.
Right.
But 99.999% of the time, they're not driving the way they're driving because of you, or to
Right.
to be mean to you, or to it's not directed at you, right? And
Right,
so
right.
whatever they have going on, so if you pray for them and think about grace. Like, I wonder what that person is going through, that they're making the choices, Why are they going 80 mile an hour and texting and driving in bumper to bumper traffic on the freeway? Like, what is going on in their life that has
Right.
brought them to that was the best decision that they thought they could make at that time?
Right. And some of that could be legitimate. Like you're saying, their wife's in the hospital having a baby and they're like trying to text somebody like, hey, can you come get the kids? Can you all this? And some of it is just, a series of poor choices.
Right.
Like it's all still a decision. It's all still very much what you decide.
It's incredible what things happen though in the world in general and in other people's lives that we're just not aware of.
Yes.
And so if you judge them from your perspective, like I'm already in a circumstance, right? I'm running late for work. I'm stressed out in my life because I have things going on and this person is irritating me. How dare they?
Right.
That's not fair to them, right? Because their actions aren't directed at you specifically or,
Right.
directly.
Right. And that's
But
also
they also didn't know you had whatever you have going on.
Right. And so then how you feel about how they are behaving is your perception. It's not necessarily reality.
Right. So just be mindful, right, of what you're reacting to within yourself and to others, and then what other perspectives other people may have, right? So introspection, and then, maybe a more global, broad view of the world to keep everything kind of in balance and in check, if you will.
Right.
It's a really great book, though, that, how, what was the one quote in there? Corn produces corn. Nettles produces nettles.
Right. They're like saying that thinking about bad things will bring good things to you and thinking about good things will bring bad things to you. Well, that's like saying if I plant corn, I'm going to get something besides corn.
Right. And that's not
impossible.
The case, right? Yeah. Right. Exactly. So just food for thought. But, so with that, I know that you've read a lot of books about like the developing minds of children. And we've talked a lot about in our home about neuroplasticity, right? So you can literally train your brain, right?
Right. You can prime your brain to react in certain ways and to think certain things. And we talk about, I know we discussed how it's kind of like training for emergencies in an aircraft, where you have to train your brain to go into automatic mode. When something comes up, you just automatically do the things and you know what to do. And we talk about doing that with our emotions and how we react to situations as well. And that's part of that neuroplasticity. You build these algorithms in your brain. And then when this situation comes up where somebody said something to you and it hurt your feelings, you can have the algorithms where you get really offended and you get depressed and then you start eating, pints and pints of ice cream and then you feel really bad about it. Or you can stop and think about it and be like, well, why did that bother me so much? What's going on with them? And go a more positive route and be like, well, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe I need to think about it. Maybe they're just totally wrong and they were just being, really mean. So it's just, you can train your brain to go either one of those paths.
Right. And so I have one of the DPs that I use, designated pilot examiners for the non-pilot fans that I have, is Doug Rosendahl, phenomenal guy. He flies, he's a pretty high-ranking individual. I don't remember his exact title, but like a commander for the commemorative Air Force. He's flown P-51s and DC-3s and all kinds of really cool airplanes, and I just highly respect the guy. He's very safety conscious.
Yeah, he's done some amazing things.
He has an incredible life and an incredible story, and he would tell you that he flew a DC-3 for the Normandy 75th Beaches of Normandy commemorative event in France.
That was awesome.
Flew a DC-3 from the United States to France for that, and just the story behind that and all the team of people that he worked with to do that, just incredible. Like, he's one of my sort of role models, right? He's just had a wealth of experience. But what he says, and I've seen him say this in videos, he said this in some of my check rides, and that he's like, in an emergency situation, right? Whenever you're faced with whatever the emergency is, right? So bird hit the windshield, or the engine failed, or the thing, right? The red light comes on, and you're faced with that. Your instinctual reaction is panic, right?
Yes.
Like, that's just human nature, right? We can't do anything. We can't just not panic, right? So bring a towel and thank you for all the fit. No, that's...
So long.
That's a different.
No.
That's a different book.
Right.
But so he talks about that, and he says, okay, so the first thing when that happens, instinctually, your body's going to take a huge shot of adrenaline, right?
Yes.
That's your normal biological response to an emergency situation. You take this huge shot of adrenaline. What happens? Okay, now you're all amped up. Your body goes into hyper focus, right? You get tunnel vision, and all you can see is that much right in front of you, right? So whatever instrument you're working at. And so the emergency procedures in an aircraft are designed, right, to get yourself out of that tunnel vision, right, and to get yourself to be able to cope with that emergency properly, right? You have to have a checklist. You have to have a conditioned response to deal with that emergency. Okay, so when you have an emergency, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to fly the airplane, right? So best glide speed, right? And then start setting up whatever your parameters are, right? So determine your altitude, determine whatever so whatever other circumstances you want to have, whatever your checklist is, you have to build that, and you have to practice it, and it has to become second nature. It's not something that you can look up the checklist and start reading through it. If you're a less experienced pilot, you can do that, right? If you've got enough airspeed and enough altitude to be able to do that, right? So the 5 most worthless things to a pilot are the runway behind you, the altitude above you, 1/10 of a second ago.
Right.
The fuel you didn't get.
Yeah.
Well, what was the other one that I use? Now I've put myself on the spot.
I don't remember
Maybe
this one.
Maybe it's the 4 most worthless things to a pilot. We'll just eliminate the 5th one.
Yes.
The money.
And the fifth thing. The fifth thing is the
the money you didn't have.
Yes.
Excuse me. Sorry about that. So, but and so then that checklist, right? So that conditioned response helps you get you out of that tunnel vision, and it brings your focus back into view and handling the situation, and that is how you can condition your brain to react to day-to-day, emergencies, traumatic events, or...
Well, it's just like kids doing fire drills or tornado drills at school.
Right. Same principles, right? And so you can be intentional with your home life and your daily life and practice drills. Like when you notice you're becoming angry, okay, have a go-to, right? Okay, I'm angry.
Yeah. So
my go-to now is I'm going to go through my de-escalation checklist.
Right.
Whatever's made me angry, it doesn't matter. Whatever. I'm going to communicate that. I'm going to treat everybody around me with grace, and we're going to sort of defuse and de-escalate that,
Right.
because being angry isn't solving anything.
Right. And that's not to say that anger is a bad thing at all, because anger can be a very productive emotion if you use it intentionally.
Right.
How the emotion itself is not what's bad. It's how people
How you react to it.
react to
Yep,
it, or
absolutely.
use it as what becomes the bad thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's where it gets tough, because people tend to think of negative emotions as being bad. And it's not necessarily the emotion, it's how people react to it and how they use it.
And you use the term neuroplasticity a lot, and we use that when
do.
you're talking to our kids quite a bit, because you
They're
can
probably the
literally
only
train
kids
your
in school that know that word.
right for real. But it's important, and it's
Well, we even have, like, you even actually touched on this already, that list that says, watch your thoughts, because your thoughts become your actions, and then your actions become your
behaviors.
Your behaviors, and your behaviors become your character, and your character becomes your destiny. So even just having the thoughts can eventually lead to it having very long-term effects in your life.
Right. And so when you get to a point in your life, like, oh, there's some people that are, I call it a fatalist mentality. We're like, oh, my life sucks. Oh, everything is just awful. And why does this happen to me?
Oh, I dropped
It's
my
like-
phone and the screen cracked. Oh, like this always happens to me. Why do I have such terrible luck?
I watched a video of a guy. This is random non sequitur here. So a video of a janitor that worked at the Empire State Building in New York, and one of his tasks is to clean out that they have a strainer system in all those pipelines, all those drainage pipes before they go out to like the street and the rest of the sewage system, and they pull out literally thousands of cell phones every day out of this.
Oh, no.
So people drop their cell phones in toilets, and they're like, they don't want to reach in after it because that's gross. So they just flush it, and there it goes. Look, they've just lost their cell phone.
Oh.
Thousands of cell phones every day get flushed down the toilet at the Empire State Building
Oh, that's
in New
sad.
York.
That's sad.
Right?
I would be sad.
So when people are angry in New York, they may have been at the Empire State Building.
They might have, yeah.
and their phone was flushed down the toilet. So you have to have a little empathy for them. Like, I feel bad for them now.
Yeah.
Their poor phone, right? And all their pictures and all their contacts. And
That's
I hope they had an iPhone backup on the cloud.
right.
Right?
Oh my
I don't
gosh.
know. Imagine that. That's,
And to kind of tie into that, we've talked about this before, where the worst thing that's ever happened to you and the worst thing that's ever happened to me objectively may not be equal.
right. Like,
but-
I can come up with worse things that have happened to me than any worse thing that has happened to you.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that my worst thing is worse than yours, because your worst
Subjectively,
thing,
right.
your worst thing that's ever happened to you is still the worst thing that has ever
Right.
happened to you. So that is your
That's my
That's your
top
benchmark.
level. That's
your
my
benchmark. So my benchmark,
experience.
my worst thing may be up here, but as a benchmark, they're both the same thing.
Yes,
Right?
to ourselves. Yes,
And so-
somebody looking from the outside could be like, "Well, yeah, obviously his is worse," but
The comparison game is a
yeah,
really poor road to try to go down.
it is, because, but like we were saying, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is your worst thing, and that's where your bar is. The worst thing that's ever happened to me may not be objectively as bad, but it's still the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and that's my bar. So,
Right. Yep. No.
so it's just good to be mindful that even though maybe somebody looks like they've had a really cushy life or whatever, and this one thing happens, you're like, wow, I've been through way worse. They're still having that worst thing that ever happened to me reaction.
Well, and that's particularly important to be mindful of in children, especially young children, right? So when a child has when their toy breaks,
Their favorite toy.
right? So children let's just say they're in a good, caring, nurturing family, and they've always been shown love, and they've always had all of their needs provided for, right? Their diapers changed, their meals and everything. And so they've got a really low bar for, bad things that have happened to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then their favorite toy breaks. they're crushed. Like that's devastating. Like this memory and this cherished object is now ended.
Yeah.
And that loss and the significance of that and their processing of it is fun. It's huge. Yep. It's phenomenal. And so they have this huge negative emotion associated, wrapped up around that.
And it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them.
And as an adult, right? So we've had so many horrible things happen to us in our lives getting up to the point where we have children that it seems such like a minor, that was just a whatever. Don't worry about it. Why are you being so... And
why are you so upset? Why is this such a big deal?
It's at that point when we need to take a step back and realize, okay, perspective-wise, right, that was the same as the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Right? If that's the worst thing that's ever happened to this child, that's the same as, the horrible thing that's happened to you in your life.
Right.
And so if you consider it from that vantage point, right, we can react with a lot more empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
And that's going to make the difference in how that child learns to react to and adapt to things.
And it changes the way you react to it.
Right.
It changes the way you think about it and the way you react to it. And then that helps them as well. So it's like you can get into a vicious cycle where you get into the negative game and it just builds and builds and builds and becomes worse and worse and worse. You can do it the other way too. It can become a positive cycle where it just builds on itself and helps it get better.
During the Revolutionary War, and as the predecessor to that, there was a publication that was published called Common Sense. And at the time, that common sense, while some people did talk about it like we are now, it wasn't as common as you would think. And even if it was common knowledge, it's not necessarily something that's at the forefront, of the people's frontal lobe where they're considering it at the time when other things are going on, right? So bringing that and discussing things and bringing it to the forefront to help shape our cultural perspectives and our personal perspectives is important, right? So that's what we try to do here in the open air, is sharing our life experiences and our perspectives and our knowledge, right, we gain, because I believe we all lift each other up and we all succeed together. It's not, it used to be knowledge is power, right? So people would try to get as much knowledge as they could, but then they would keep that knowledge and they wouldn't share it with anybody.
Right.
Because if I know something you don't know, I hold power over you.
Right.
And I don't believe that way. I believe we all lift each other up, we all succeed together, and then guess what? The world now becomes a better place.
Right.
Because of it, right? We all have better experiences, better perspectives. We make better choices, and the world becomes a better place. And this is the butterfly effect on steroids, right? It's
absolutely.
intensified.
Absolutely.
I wrote down adaptability, right? So that's one of the things. So neuroplasticity, positivity, but then adaptability, right? So you can train your brain, but you also have to learn some sort of flexibility, right? So even in those emergency wow.
I love that word.
Situations and scenarios at the same time. I just invented a new word.
I love it.
I'm going to call the Oxford Dictionary people and see if
not Merriam-Webster, huh?
I wanted the Oxford. Well, I mean, we can do Merriam as a backup if that doesn't work.
That works.
Wow, situational scenario. I don't even know where I was going with that conversation now.
We were talking about adaptability.
Adaptability and flexibility, right? What a perfect word for that.
Yes.
So you have your checklist, you deal with that, right? And so, you bring yourself out of tunnel vision and you bring the world or the circumstances back into perspective, but then you can make, whatever this, I have so many situations in my head now that I'm trying to talk about how I would handle them from a flight instructor's perspective. And I can't do every emergency procedure. simultaneously because an engine fire is very different than you've lost an engine or the tail fell off or you're being shot at.
I think
whatever.
something you're trying to get at with the adaptability, though, is that you can train for an engine fire, right?
Yep.
In the air.
Yes.
But what happens if your engine catches on fire while you're taking off and you haven't trained for that? Well, you can use the knowledge that you have about, emergencies on takeoff
Right.
and engine fires in the air to help you adapt and address that situation.
And so that's a great. So loss of thrust on takeoff is a huge thing. Dan Greider, a friend of mine, is a controversial figure for a lot of reasons. He can be a little brash at times. He has had a very successful life and career. He's also had some life situations that have happened, and I don't know a lot of the details. Maybe he made poor choices. Maybe they've been highly embellished and dramatized for effects, and so people are making him look bad. I don't know a lot of those details, so I really don't speak to that. But what I can say is his loss of thrust on takeoff and his AQP standards is spot on. And I really appreciate he has actually demonstrated that he can reduce accidents in general aviation.
Yeah.
And he was involved in a recent twin engine aircraft in the Amelia, in an accident in the Amelia aircraft, the Lockheed Model 12A. And he seems to be doing okay now. And so our prayers, thoughts and prayers have gone out to him.
Yeah.
And, controversial or not, I'm not condoning any of his other choices or life choices, or I'm not stating that he's a perfect individual, and I think he would agree with that. But his AQP and what he's doing for loss of thrust and takeoff and changing the way people think about, right, and briefing each other on their loss of power or having an engine fire on takeoff, right? These are unlikely things to happen. We don't think about it. But at the time when they happen, right, that takeoff phase is a highly critical phase. You don't have any time. You've got no altitude below you. You've got no runway ahead of you. You have a very, very small window of opportunity to react to that. So it has to be push, right? Land straight, pushing those over, land straight ahead. You don't have a lot of time to do all the things and think about it and go through the checklist and all that, right? That is a condition in flight, right, that you need to be prepared 100% of the time. And,
right, it has to be automatic.
And it has to be automatic, right, because you just don't have time to think about it.
And the hard thing about that in particular is that is contrary to what our reaction is.
Right. You don't have altitude,
don't want to
so
crash.
You want to pull back,
so we want
right?
to pull back and
you want to pull back. You need more altitude. Well, you don't have the airspeed to gain that altitude, so now you're a rock. Right. Because as soon as it stalls, you've lost control of the aircraft.
And now you're higher in the air.
And that is loss of control, right? Accident or loss of thrust on takeoff leads to loss of control. And so you've got to keep that airspeed up, and the only way to do that is to push the nose over. Anyway, this really wasn't about emergency procedures today, but
it's a good, nice little tidbit, though.
That's one I want to get across to people. And for the non-pilots and other people that are listening for other aviation trades, right, these are things that pilots need to think about and learn. So if you're a flight attendant or an air traffic controller, I think it's important for you to know that this is things that pilots need to know and need to be practicing and learning, because that's should be setting that expectation, right? So the air traffic controllers, the flight attendants, they should know that that's what they're going to do, and that's how it's going to sort of
and that helps them understand maybe why they react the way they react to certain situations.
What were you thinking? Yeah, when you asked the question, what were you thinking? Well, now you have a little bit of insight as to what was going on in that pilot's head. And if they don't practice that, right, and they act more instinctually, they may be getting it wrong, right? So that is going against your instincts in practicing some of those scenarios. And it's important in flight training.
Very much so.
And so that's some of that adaptability I was talking about. But so one of the things in Open Air that I try to do is I try to promote aviation as an ideal STEM learning platform, right? STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math, right? And so the argument can be made for STEAM, right? Because the people for the creative arts have injected the A into that, and they, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, because they're trying to get the arts to the forefront of people's learning. I appreciate that. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't necessarily disagree with it. I don't see the hard relationship. Like science, technology, engineering, math, I see that as an important set of
Well, all of those
skill
have elements
learning
of all
lessons.
the other ones. They're so
Right.
intertwined, it's kind of hard to separate them out sometimes.
Right. And the arts, to me, is a little bit separate. It doesn't fit into that same genre to me. Right. But also, right, it's kind of funny in the educational world. So the agriculture in Iowa, right, 99% of our land literally is farmland.
Right.
So, the agricultural people are like, well, the A stands for agricultural.
Right.
And so
Right.
as a aviation ambassador, I believe the A, like, why doesn't it stand for aviation? Right. So science, technology, engineering, aviation, and math. Right. So aviation encompasses all of those subject areas. So, and that's the hotly contested A. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
When
yeah.
I do speaking engagements and when I talk to schools and that sort of thing, that's kind of the fun little thing that I have come up with. But we talk about why aviation.
Right.
What, like why do you want to learn to fly? Why do you want to be a flight attendant or air traffic controller or aviation mechanic, line person or whatever. So let's talk about that a little bit. So first of all, for you, why aviation?
Why aviation? Aviation is a pretty amazing field. There is far more to it than a lot of people think about. Most people just think taking an airplane to Florida for spring break. Okay, that's aviation.
We took a van.
We did take a van. You would think we would have taken a plane, but we didn't.
Yeah.
But that's where most people's minds go when they think about aviation, is just flying an airplane somewhere for a vacation or something similar. But there's so much more to it than that. I'm going to maybe Go for it.
I'm trying not to get too personal here, but I know you really well.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of things, and so I'll try to find that balance a little bit. But I know you came to me in 2018, right? I was a flight instructor starting a flight club in your community in Lamoni.
Yes.
And I had roughly a dozen people that started out that were interested in flying because the airport manager there was a pilot, a very skilled pilot and an ag spray guy, but he was not a flight instructor. He had given rides to dozens of people,
right,
and talked about aviation all the time. He's a very charismatic guy, and so he had a lot of people inspired to become aviators. But he wasn't a flight instructor, and so he's like, "Well, I need a flight instructor." I'm like, "Well, hey, I'm a flight instructor.
I know a guy,
but I'm a 45-minute flight away from his airport, and so I'm like, well, I can't afford to. I shouldn't use the word can't.
Yes.
I'm trying not to use that. So it's more difficult for me to afford to fly down there to teach one student. Right? It's harder for me to justify that, right, financially.
Right.
But if I have a group of students, I can fly down there and absorb that cost across several students.
Right.
And now it's worth it for me to fly down there, right? So I have to just think about flight instruction down there. So we started this sort of group learning flight club mentality.
We don't talk about flight club.
That's the first rule of flight club,
right,
isn't it? I biffed it. What happens at flight club stays at flight club.
Yes.
And so the beauty of that was, so we started the Lamoni Flight Club, and I had about a dozen people, and then I started less, and then I got down to about 6 students that were pretty serious.
Yeah.
At the time, and we were going through all of those scenarios and training and learning, and then I won the award for my book. It was the 2019 Aviation Ride of the Year Award for the Minnesota Aviation Hall of Fame. And I'm a flight instructor in Iowa, so that meant a lot to me on several levels. Like, I was getting my name out there and making a difference. And the name of the book was The Open Air. And so we went from the Lamoni Flight Club to the Open Air Flight Club, because I just tried to conjoin those two for, marketing and branding and that sort of thing. I just thought I really have a deep appreciation for the Open Air Flight Club and how that came about. But what I know at the time was you'd gone through a divorce.
Yes.
And you were a single mom, and you were making like somewhere around $11 or $12 an hour.
Yeah, at that time probably.
And at a full-time job. And did you have part-time job at that time also?
No, I just had the one full-time job.
Yeah, well, because being a single mom is a full-time job.
Yes.
Right. And so, and you basically were starting with nothing, right? You didn't have a big, vast savings. You didn't get a ton of child support and alimony and all those kind of stuff, right? So you were pretty much on your own and self-sufficient at that point, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it was definitely kind of starting from scratch again.
And you decided that you wanted to learn to fly.
Yeah.
because and how did that come about? Like, how did you decide that?
So prior to you talking to the airport manager and coming down, the airport had just recently expanded their runway. And that was a really big deal, and they wanted to throw a big celebration. So the city had a big luncheon party thing at the airport. And
this was a big deal because this city was the poorest county the poorest city in the poorest county in Iowa, if I understand correctly, right?
Yes.
And that was you were actually featured in a newspaper article where they
I was on the news,
presented that information.
I was on the news, yeah.
You were in the news for that, yeah.
Yeah.
So you were in the poorest city in Iowa.
Yes.
Making what some people would consider to be minimum wage, right?
Yes.
Back in 2018,
which
you're making $11, $12
for that
an
area
hour.
was actually a really, really good salary.
As a single mom with nothing,
right?
And so you went and was a free ride in the airplane that you got?
Yeah. So a lot of the local pilots volunteered to give rides to people. And they also had somebody there who did stunt plane rides. You had to pay for those. But I know several people who did that and loved it. They did loops and rolls and,
sure.
Made people throw up, all that good stuff. I was not so interested in that. And I had to work that day, and I went out in the evening, and there were still a ton of people waiting in line to take these rides. And so I started helping kind of group people together because they're like, well, we have to keep it at a certain weight limit and we can only have so many people per ride. And, we don't want kids going without their parents or a parent. So there was a lot of kind of moving parts.
Yep. And you were helping manage that.
I was helping manage that. And then as it was getting toward the end of the day, and the lines were coming down. I'm like, if you're not too tired, if you want to keep going, I would love to take a ride. Like I have never been in an airplane ever, not a jet, nothing, not no helicopters, no nothing. And one of the pilots,
the air guys,
air
people.
One of the pilots took me up for a ride in his airplane, and it was a Cessna 150.
Was he an Avatar?
No.
An airbender?
No. But little bitty airplane, he took me for a ride, and it was amazing.
And what airplane was this? Do you remember what kind of airplane it was?
The 150. No, the 140, sorry. 140.
Was it Dennis?
It was Dennis's son.
Oh, that's right. Yes. You had told me that. So
yeah.
Anyway, both not Dennis's. Well, Dennis's other son was a student of mine.
Yeah.
And Dennis has gone to me from BFRs. Him and his other son, that's a mechanic, have they rebuilt this airplane, Cessna 140.
It was a really
gorgeous.
Nice little airplane.
It was really
it was the blue one.
Nicely done. It was beautiful. I love flying that thing.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got to ride with them.
Yeah, it was terrifying because I'd never done it before. And of course, takeoff is always kind of terrifying because you're like, are we going to get off the ground? Like, what's going to happen here?
Right.
But we got up and it was just so peaceful.
Yes.
And just so serene and calming. And you would think people would be terrified of being that high above the ground. And you don't really think about it. It's an odd sensation, and until you experience it, it's really, really hard to describe to people.
There are a lot of pilots who say one of the things that they appreciate most about aviation is they leave all their troubles on the ground. When you're in the air, you're in the air and you're doing aviation stuff, right? You're enjoying you're looking at the world from God's vantage point, right? In an overall sense, right? But it's just the view is spectacular. Your perception is of the world, right? Is so you feel so small and insignificant because you see how big and vast the whole world is, and so all your problems become like infinitesimal for the duration of the flight.
It's very therapeutic.
It's tremendous.
For lack of better words, it really is.
And so, so you got that ride in the airplane, and you decided, I don't have any money. I should spend it all. I should spend a bunch of it on learning a trade that I may not pursue.
I started researching it and looking into all the facets and trying to figure out, can I make this work? How could I do this? And then it was talking about flight schools, and you have to drive somewhere else to do that. So I'm like, well, that's a lot of time for me to dedicate to the training, and a lot of time for me to dedicate to the driving, plus the gas. And so it was adding up very, very quickly and seemed very improbable. I'm not going to say impossible.
Right.
Because I try not to use that word.
Right.
Because anything's possible. But it was seeming very improbable that it was going to ever work out. So it was very serendipitous that there would be a flight instructor coming down to the town that I lived in to do flight training.
Some little small airport in the middle of nowhere, almost Missouri.
Yeah.
That was literally the poorest community in the state of Iowa.
Yes.
And you're going to have a flight instructor teaching how to fly there.
Right. So I kind of took that as a sign from God. It was like, well, I don't have a whole lot of excuses now because...
I feel like using the line from the Blues Brothers. I'm on a mission from God.
Yes.
So anyway, what a fun... And so we did your training with the flight club. We had all kinds of experiences. I know you and I drove to Des Moines one night, and it was in the evening. And I remember you making... What'd you say? You remember?
So we had flown to Des Moines several times at night.
Yes.
At like 2 a.m.
Well, because we needed night cross countries and we needed control tower time. And so I found ways to be efficient with the entire flight club and find ways to get as many of the boxes checked as we could for as many people as we could so we could get all the things done.
Yep. And it was nice because even if we were riding instead of actually piloting, we were still learning because we're hearing it all.
You're hearing your traffic control, you're hearing the weather. Yeah, exactly. It was experiential learning even from the back.
We had flown to Des Moines at night a couple different times, and we drove up there and we were driving through an area that we flew over all the time. And I was like, oh, I'm not used to seeing Des Moines at night from the ground.
It was funny.
Because I was trying to figure out where we were. I was like, I don't recognize this area.
And I told her where we were, and you're like, oh, I'm not used to seeing this at night from the ground. It was just it was a really funny comment to me. It was fantastic. I loved that.
Yes, and in all fairness, it did take me 2 years to finally get my pilot's license, and there were a lot of reasons for that.
Sure, first of all,
so I don't want anybody to think that it was like we met and then in a month I was a pilot. I don't want to give that impression.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
because I feel like some people think that's how it goes. And
I really didn't favor her as a student, especially in the beginning. Because it was all the flight club, right? So all of my students, we've all gotten to be friends now, and it was an incredible set of circumstances. But I didn't give you any favoritism. I didn't favor you over any of my other students, right?
No.
So I was down there. I had a job to do. I was a professional. But I do, with all of my students, I try to help source, right? Like we talked about this earlier, sharing knowledge, right? So any of the scholarships that I'm aware of or sources for how to find scholarships that I'm aware of, I share with my students.
Right.
And you were able to become a member of the Iowa 99s.
Yes.
and you got a scholarship that paid for a significant portion of your flight training.
I'm trying to remember how much it was, because I think it was up to 6,000.
Yeah.
And I think I
something
got
like that.
4 because because it was a reimbursement scholarship. So
Sure.
you would do your first solo and they
Sure.
would reimburse you a certain dollar amount for that, as an average of how much training time that was and fuel and however much that would cost on average. And I had already passed a couple of those milestones by the time I got the scholarship. And because I hadn't gotten the scholarship before those, they don't pay for them retroactively.
Sure.
But still, getting $4,000 to help pay for that training was very helpful.
A lot of, and I talk about this in the book. So here's a plug for the book, Open Air Flight Club. How to Win Friends and Influence. No, that's Dale Carnegie.
Oh, yes.
But the Open Air Flight Club, right? So this is the 20 frequently asked questions about, aviation, right? Aviation trades and that sort of thing. So if you're curious if this is right for you or what it's going to take, those 20 frequently asked questions that I've gotten from students and teachers and parents over the years are all encompassed in this book.
I bought a copy of this book early on, and it was extremely helpful for me. It was
the reason I like her.
It really was, though. Like you had mentioned that you had written this book. I looked it up. I bought a copy before I ever started.
And
flight
you gave
training.
this copy to other some of my other students, from what I understand.
Yeah, I loaned it out to them.
And so they learned a lot from that as well. I know that they've commented on it,
But it actually was extremely helpful for me, and that's not just like, well, yeah, I telling you it's helpful because he's my flight instructor. No, it really was.
And I went kind of Disney and got some Easter eggs in here and stuff. So I try to make it, worth people's time and value for their money. I think you really enjoy it. If you're interested in aviation, please buy a copy. It really helps us keep doing what we're doing. But and it's available on Amazon.
And we made lots of really great improvements with the latest edition.
We have.
So.
And I appreciate your help with that as well. But so the really cool part of all that, though, is that you got your license. And so we got through. I helped. Oh, and I was going to say, you were talking about cost. I tell people it's going to cost somewhere around $10,000 now today with inflation the way it's been the last 3-4 years, and the economy. It may go up to $12,000 to $15,000 to be completely honest for cost. I would say less than 20 is a very fair statement in most places, right? So in New York, California, some really high, very expensive areas, then that you're probably going to be close to the 20,000, and depending on the flight instructor's experience and the type of plane you're flying, right? So there's a lot of variables in that, but there are scholarships and grants and other types of things available to help with that, right? And that's one of the things that I try to help people with. It's all talked about in the book as well. But one of my students of the Open Air Flight Club kept track of all their expenses the entire time.
Oh, he did. He nickeled and
like
dimed it. Oh my gosh.
Everything, like every expense that he had. And at the end, he got his pilot's license. He goes, it only cost me $8,300 and some odd, dollars, and about $8,300.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you owe me $1,700. He's like, fat chance.
Right. But
so I try really hard not to drag students out and cost them a lot of extra money building extra time. So the national average is 75 hours. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? If you're only flying on the weekends, because that's the only time, and the only money you have is like flying every week or every other week. I use the rule of thumb that you lose about 10% of knowledge for every day you don't fly.
I would agree.
So if you go 10 days without flying, you've lost almost 100% of the knowledge from the previous lesson, right?
I would
some
agree
of it
with
come
that.
back, sure, right? That's not a hard, and it depends on what the lesson was and what your skill level is as a human being and as a person, and where you're at in your flight training, and what that topic is, right? So some people have a topic that just comes natural and really easy for them, and then there's landings, right? Or everybody
yeah.
has their own nemesis, right? So it
Mine
could be
was-
weather,
Yeah, mine was the flight computer.
the flight computer. It could be weather. It
Ugh.
could be lots of things. So everybody has their nemesis in flight training, and it seems like it's always different. Landing seems to be more common with people, but that's one of those things that once you get it down, then you've built those neuroplasticity, right? You've built those algorithms in your brain, and then you go and practice it a few times, and then it's like more natural, and it's like, wow,
Right.
how could I? It's like learning to walk, right? How could I ever not do that?
Right.
Right? We walk around all the time. We don't even think about it. But like when we were, 6 months old, walking seemed improbable. You know what I mean?
Like-
From our vantage point, it's like, wow, how do adults do
How
that?
do they do that?
Right? I can crawl like a banshee, right? But I can't walk. I don't know how they. So it's really, and you can always build those algorithms in your brain. Neuroplasticity is always there. You can always learn. And aviation is a skill in which it's perpetual learning
Oh, absolutely.
throughout your life.
Absolutely.
And it's going to enhance the quality of your life. You learn about weather, you learn about life skills, you learn about travel and distance, time management, financial management. You learn about rules and regulations. You learn a little bit of French and other languages.
Yeah.
I tell beginning flight students that aviation is a lot like learning a new language.
Yes.
And it literally is, because there's a lot of French words that were used because, the United States is the first country to invent the airplane. The Wright brothers didn't actually invent the airplane. The airplane had already been largely invented. What they actually invented and what their patent states is the three methods of control, the three axes of control. So the pitch, roll, and aileron. Pitch, roll, and...
They perfected controlled flight.
Yeah. I was...
Yeah. Yeah. You agreeing with me?
Yes.
Pitch roll and yeah. That is a real
yeah,
word. That
yeah.
Y-A-W. He's
Yes.
not just saying yeah.
Yes. So the three axes of control flight is what the Wright brothers actually invented, but they also found ways to make the airplane lighter and more efficient. And so they made many, many, many contributions. But the French, the Russians, the Brazilians, many other countries were using Bernoulli's principles and Newton's laws of motion and all of the other articles of the time. There were many people that had invented versions of gliders and airplanes of various levels of effectiveness. And the Wright brothers were prolific readers and were reading about all these and all about these failures. And they were also very scientifically minded in that they took the time to document and record and study and assess everything that they did ad nauseum to show where their failures were, where their improvements were, and then they would capitalize on them. And that is how they got to where they are. And it's because they were just relentlessly brilliant and methodical human beings.
Right.
And unapologetically so. Like they followed their process. Like they didn't care how long it took them to get there. They were going to get there. That was their mission. And they didn't care how long it took them to get there. And they didn't necessarily set out to be the first, but they wanted to learn to fly. And so they wanted to be safe and effective. That was their goal. They wanted to learn to fly, and they wanted to go out and do that. They also, weren't prolific readers, and they were aware of what everybody else was doing, but there were so many other people doing it. They were aware that they may not necessarily be the first, but they still wanted to be the best at what they were doing, and they wanted to make sure that they were doing it correctly.
Yes.
And all of that conspired to get us to where we are today.
Yeah. And
that goes into neuroplasticity and all that. But, so we talk about aviation, your experiences. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be, super intelligent. You do have to have a fair amount of health, right? So you have to be able to pass a medical screening, so you can wear glasses. We've talked about a lot of this stuff in other podcasts. It's the desire and the intent, right? So if you live your life with intent, right, regardless of your circumstances, right? You were a single mom, you didn't make high wages, and you were in the poorest city in the state of Iowa.
Yeah.
And didn't have a huge support structure too, from what I understand, right? So, and yet you were able to pull it off. And, you came, and because you approached it with intent, right?
Yes.
You carefully considered all of your options. You found the best option. You had a great opportunity, and then you figured it out as you went along. Now, that's
Yes.
one of your skill sets, and that's kind of with open air, one of the things that you've helped me sort of build into the model and to be able to help people more effectively. And so we're kind of set up to be, I want to say, a mentor of mentors, right? So we've learned a lot about how to help people and how to lift people up and help them achieve success. And we've been able to duplicate that. And so we can help teach other flight schools a lot of those methodologies, things that work, things that don't work. And so, if you want help with that, or if you know a flight school or an
Yeah.
airport that wants help with that, reach out to us. That's one of the things that, we're really good at. It's kind of where our skill set is these days. But aviation. So we talked about the Wright brothers. Aviation started in the United States. So this is literally an American icon, right? It's a staple of our culture. And yet, it was talked about. It was prolific in our day-to-day conversations. There were, we'd fought World War I, World War II. Records have been broken. We broke the speed. Chuck Yeager broke the speed of sound. We had amazing aircraft. B-17s and B-25s. World War II, we dropped the bomb on Japan. We had Jimmy Doolittle that set military records and accomplishments and civilian like time, speed, distance accomplishments. Jimmy Doolittle was also a famous aviation innovator. He invented a lot of the instruments, right? The artificial horizon and instruments that were used in the aircraft for flying in inclement weather. And so he could fly in the cloud and basically invented the instrument flight in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
Those early aviation accomplishments and those major heroes that stand out for a lot of their major contributions to aviation were talked about. They were prolific and they were setting time and distance records and all this stuff going on. And it was in every newspaper. It was talked about on the radio. When television came along, there was, The Aviator and, aviation movies and all this stuff and the wars and the heroes and the accomplishments. That was all talked about up until about the 70s. Vietnam was not as popular.
Right.
And then there were fuel embargoes. And then in the 80s, you had Reagan fired a bunch of air traffic controllers. And so that was a huge hit to aviation. You had, in the Carter years, in the 70s, you also had nationally televised and, hijackings that did not go well. So now you had airliner hijackings, and you had, the negativity of war and fighting and battle. Now it wasn't about records and accomplishments anymore, but it was, about decadence and debauchery and, death and
and
really a shift in our perception.
World War II's aviation was largely revered because we were fighting against the evil of Hitler and Germany and all that.
Right.
When it came to Vietnam, a lot of people disagreed with us being there, and so that kind of bled over into villainizing the aviation portion of it as well.
Right. Unintentionally, but that's, that's what sort of transpired. And then you had the 80s and 90s. 90s, then you had the economic impact of the 70s and 80s all conspired in the 90s. And that's when I was learning to fly, and you couldn't get an airline job if your life depended on it. And even if you did, they didn't pay anything at that time.
Right.
But I remember being in the unemployment line, and there were several pilots that were there. I was competing with other jobs with pilots that had been laid off because they'd been laid off. And so they were getting, hired for other jobs that I was trying to get. And it was like, man, I can't become a pilot or it was difficult for me to become a pilot. I shouldn't say can't. It's a really hard word to get rid of, by the way.
It is.
Just say.
It's insidious.
But it was really difficult for me to get a job as a pilot then, and built, I didn't have very much experience, and I was learning to fly and that sort of thing. So that was my career goal. But then getting other jobs, because I was competing with laid off pilots for those other jobs, it was kind of a double hit, honestly.
Yeah.
And now I'm now thankful for it, because now I have a very robust career in many facets of aviation, trying to, approach my career with intent. And I wanted to stay in aviation, so I had to make a lot of sacrifices, and I had to go into other areas of aviation that I wouldn't maybe not have considered otherwise. So now I have this wealth of experience that I've built that are just not common for people to be able to get. And so I'm very, very thankful for those opportunities.
Yeah.
So where we are in a country now, half of aviation in the world, over 200 and some countries in the world. I don't even know how many countries there are in the world now.
Seems like it's changing every day.
The one gets blown up and wiped off the map, and so that doesn't exist anymore. And then they build a new one over here. So half of all aviation in the world occurs every day in the United States. That's something that I think we as a nation and as a culture take for granted, or for granted if you are an English major.
No.
No.
Just
Sorry for all my English teacher friends. I apologize. I make joke, but it's something that I don't think is considered, is how, like, aviation is fully 5% of our national gross domestic product.
Yeah.
That's like nearly $2 trillion worth of revenue is generated in aviation in the United States, right? It is a very significant impact in our economy and in our culture. And so that's why I think learning aviation, it's not taught in most public schools, right? So I think that's a mistake. I think learning aviation should be part of our culture, right? At least some element. Maybe not a private pilot's license. Maybe just a drone operator, or unmanned aerial vehicle operator,
right?
Or air traffic controller, or flight attendant, or a line person, or volunteer at an airport. Even sit on the airport board and just help make decisions locally, and use your expertise in other fields to sort of help guide the airport, whatever. But I think aviation is just seriously underutilized and underappreciated in our culture. And I'm trying to do my best to drive some of that
right
knowledge and understanding.
Just expand some.
The career opportunities, right?
Yeah.
So with a trade school education, you can have a 6-figure income in aviation, right? That's pretty
huge.
well proven. It's huge. It is huge, right? So a 6-figure. So the average family income, I just watched this on a Dave Ramsey podcast. Average family income in the United States today is $77,000.
Really? That's it?
Yes. That's the average family income.
That seems awfully low.
It does. Right?
For a national average,
but
especially.
Also, right. But $77,000 is also not a bad income, right? It does sound low. But, so you can earn a 6-figure income in aviation pretty readily, right? With a trade school education. So
that's 2 years of college.
It's something that, a lot of people, I don't have time, I don't have the money to learn to fly. Well, you almost don't have the time or money not to.
Right. Well, and
you can look at it from two different vantage points.
As we've already been discussing, do you really not have the time? Do you really not have the money? Or is it a perception?
Right.
Because
so be intentional with your thought.
Well, not just that, but be honest with yourself and be introspective and be like,
Yeah, if you go out to eat dinner every day
at the fanciest restaurant in town,
right?
Do you really need that?
Right.
No.
And do you have to have a brand new 2024 dually pickup truck, or could you get by with a Honda Civic?
Right.
Like a used Honda Civic that's, you could have paid off
and
in a couple of
that's
years.
covering all the monetary side and even the time side. Well, I'm not going to say that people don't need downtime, but we come home and watch 4 hours of TV. Do you really need to watch 4 hours of TV?
Sure.
Or is 1 hour enough? Or is 2 hours enough? Because then now you have 2 extra hours to do something with. and you can
Right.
choose to make that be something productive.
Right. Yep. But so, so why aviation, right? So one of the other things, so as a hobby pilot, right? So, you got your pilot's license largely as a hobby, right? You don't have an aviation career,
Correct.
but it added a lot of wealth of depth of knowledge and perspective to your life in learning, weather
yes.
and time management, financial management skills,
Yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff. But also, if you and another candidate, even in a non-aviation trade, go into the interview and you're both equally qualified in your trade,
Right.
but you're also a pilot, right? I can't help but think that is not weighted in your favor in the consideration. Like, wow, not only do they have the qualifications to be here, but they also have some really interesting skills that they can bring to the table. When I'm going to travel, and I can lean on somebody who has a pilot's license to learn some of the ins and outs.
Right.
But the hurricanes recently, so there's been hurricanes in Florida and North Carolina, right? That was impacted.
North Carolina, Georgia.
All the flooding that's going down there. And I have several friends that have flown supplies and flown missions down there. I've helped support that with supplies and finances to be able to fly aircraft and some of the helicopters that are flying in and out to bring in critical supplies that they would have no other way to get it otherwise. And there's been a lot of talk about that. So helping people, right? So aviation is a tremendous source for outreach to get, it's time travel, right? But also money and supplies and people and supplies to locations, right? And for a long distance in a small amount of time, right? So people have to manage their time. They have careers, they have families, and they have other stuff, but they go down there and help. They can fly down, help for the weekend, a few days, and really, save lives, save families.
Right.
People have lost their homes, they've lost everything, and they're bringing, critical, chronic illness supplies. They're bringing, water, medications, just small staples, diapers, formula for babies and stuff that people had no other way to get. Other than it was flown down there. So for Christmas, I know we do Operation Santa Claus. We get a lot of gifts for needy families. There are a lot of families that are really having a tough time, with divorce and medical trials and just other life circumstances. The economy has really been hard on people.
Yeah.
And so pilots can pull together, gifts for families and fly them all over the United States, all over the world, right?
Right.
So Operation Santa Claus, as we've done through our church, goes to other countries even. And flying toys and Christmas presents, clothes, winter clothes is a big one, medical supplies to people during catastrophes here in our country. So, the ability to help others in aviation is not lost on me and our circle of friends, for sure.
Well, and there's what do they call them? The miracle flights, or
well, there's all kinds of them. There's angel flights, right? So people that have health issues, like they've flown people with like cancer and other brain injuries or other traumatic
and I know lots
events.
of people who do like the animal rescue stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
fly animals to rescue animals and get them out of areas, and pilots and paws or
Paws and pilots or something like that.
Such an alliteration right now. People piloting puppies and
probably
pointedly positioning people properly. That's probably enough of that.
Probably.
Possibly. So the ability to help people, even as a hobby. So enjoyment, right? Don't discount aviation as a hobby. So I can go out, like we talked about earlier, just being able to leave your problems on the ground and go fly for a half hour, 45 minutes, right? It's therapeutic, right? So now I have accomplished something. I've escaped gravity. I've escaped life. I've cheated death for a half hour, 45 minutes and come back on the ground. And, and it refreshes your perspective of life and things.
It does.
But, side gigs, right? So you can tow banners, you can do air shows, you can do skywriting, you can do scenic aerial rides, you can fly, airplane demos, you can do sightseeing tours locally. I know we fly over the Red Rock Dam and the Red Rock Lake here a lot.
People ferry aircraft.
Ferrying aircraft, tremendous time building and skills building experiences. Just tons of opportunity. I had a couple of students that got their pilot's license because they had family that was in distant locations, and they worked, 6 days a week, and they only had 1 day off. And so to drive 12 hours to go see family and then drive 12 hours back, they literally got 1 or 2 hours to see family, and they spent the entire rest of their time off driving it. Right. And now they bought a Mooney, and so it's a faster level aircraft, but they saved up and they spent the money, and now they can take their 1 day off and they can fly down, spend the entire day with family, wake up the next day and still have time to fly back before they have to be at work and accomplish that. So they almost gained like another half a day to be able to even spend with family.
Yeah.
Or maybe a whole day, depending on how you want to look at that. But it has literally changed their their time with their family is deeply cherished time anyway. But the increase in amount of time that they've been able to do that has been life changing for the entire family, and it's just they're amazing people anyway.
Yeah.
Flight instruction is not an easy trade. But it's a great side gig trade. Not for the faint of heart. I love the photo of the people in the roller coaster, that on this terrifying roller coaster, and come out and they take the photo right as this getting this really dark, super scary, and everybody is terrified and they're screaming and they're panicking and everything else, and the flight instructor's just sitting there like,
there's that one person just,
yep.
Wow.
Like, yep.
This is not the scariest thing I've experienced.
That would be me. It's like, yeah, I'm like, weren't you terrified? No, I'm a flight instructor. Every day my students are trying to come up with new and unusual ways to try to kill me. So, I mean,
this is a true story.
You get sort of used to it.
Whether you're in the airplane or not, sometimes.
Even if I'm not in the airplane, yes.
Yes, giving you heart attacks. That's fun.
I had a student one time that was soloing and taking off. And they literally called me I'm listening to them on their handheld radio, and they said, I can't do this.
While they're in the air, after
they're
they've
in
taken
the air.
off.
They're flying in the pattern. They're like, I can't do this. I'm like, so.
You're going to have to.
I mean, I'm like, well.
And that was not me, by the way, just in case anyone's wondering.
Was not you. And it was literally, they were just trying to get established on their approach, right? And so they were just turning in for their approach. So all they had to do is just regroup, fly their approach out a little further, and then they had more time to put in the flaps and set up and stabilize their approach. And then they were absolutely fine. So they were more than ready. They were safe, but everything didn't go as advertised, and they didn't expect it. But they said that on the radio, and it was terrifying to me.
Yes.
And it turned out once they got on the ground, they're like, "Oh, I wasn't really scared. It wasn't a big deal. It was just I recognized that I couldn't land at that point, so I knew I needed to go around and just get a second shot at it." But that's not how it got communicated to me on the ground, right? So I didn't get that whole conversation until later, and it was terrifying for me.
Like, well, you're eventually going to run out of fuel.
I almost had a heart attack because I'm like, I just killed a student. I have never done that before, and never want to.
And no joke, soloing is terrifying because it's you've been flying, you know how to do it, and you've proven you know how to do it.
It's also the most rewarding thing you will ever do in your life.
Oh my gosh.
By far.
Oh my gosh, yes. But just when your flight instructor's like, you've flown around a couple times, they're like, okay, now go do it by yourself. No.
Right.
No, thank you.
And so that brings me to another idea I wanted to share. So we used to sit around back in the day, right, before everybody had a phone in their pockets where they could take videos or send text messages to everybody instantaneously. We would sit around, drink soda or coffee or lemonade or whatever, and we would share hangar stories. We'd literally sit in the hangar and we'd tell these stories. We'd go at the airport, during events, and we cook out hamburgers on a Saturday, whatever. We share these stories, and so I'm kind of bringing them now to you over YouTube and podcast because you're busy. You're listening to now while you're driving, or you've got a downtime from your kids or whatever. And so
doing chores around the house,
I'm
whatever.
Helping reinvent the way we share these old hanger stories, but we learn from each other's experiences, right? So I share some of my successes and some of my failures because I want you to learn from them. I want you to recognize that, all the things that are going on in your life, while they may be stressful, right? They're not unique to just you. Everybody has things.
Right.
And maybe if that helps you get through your things by listening to like some of the things that I've been through or that we've been through or we've accomplished or we've done, if that helps you in some way, then I have served my purpose and accomplished my goal with the open air. So what else? What else do you want to share today? No, not that.
No, not that. You put me on the spot. I wasn't ready.
Yeah. I mean, we've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about today.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
excited to hear more about your book. Like, we listened to it a little bit on the ride home from Des Moines the other night. So
As a Man Thinketh book.
Yeah,
I thought you meant my open air book. I'm like,
I mean that too.
I wrote it. You proofread it. So I mean, and
Several
you read
times.
it after that.
Several times.
And then you proofread the new version.
I think I've read that book.
You're like, you want to hear more about this? Like I'm done talking about me. I want to hear what you have to say about me.
I know, right? No, I'm excited to hear more about your As a Man Thinketh book. The little bit that I heard on the way home from Des Moines was very fascinating, and I know that I've missed out on some things that you had heard before that, and some things you've listened to after that. And I'm just very interested to hear more about how he goes into maybe how to do those things, how to prime your brain to do that.
I have a lot of travel time during my days, and so I'm trying to use that to help build those algorithms in my brain, thinking about, creative thinking, problem-solving thinking, business level thinking, and thinking about thinking, right? In a sense, to become and build the things that I want to become and the things that I want to build. I have to learn how to. We've had this conversation, incidentally, with the business and my personal goals. Is how do I think my way into the solution, right? So you have to develop skill. If there's things that you're not good at now, but you need them to get where you want to be, then you have to figure out how to develop them. That's largely what I am accomplishing right now through As a Man Thinketh and some of the other things that we've been working on and doing as we're building towards these goals of becoming the best person that I can be so that I can accomplish the best what I want to say, accomplish the best that I can.
Just be the best you.
I want to be the best me I can be. You see,
and no one else can do that. No one else can be you.
I am the best me there is, by far.
You're the only one.
So the other thing I want to throw a plug in here: the new Avi Nation magazine is out. I love this magazine. I helped Jacob Peed start this magazine back in 2017, and him and I have had many, many, many conversations. I've shared, my students have shared, I have shared. We've done a lot together to work on this magazine. I am very, very thankful to have the opportunity to be able to advertise in the magazine. He has an newsletter that goes out, and I've been able to advertise and help him with that as well and build this thing up. Phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal. And if you become a member of the Open Air Flight Club, I also throw in not a prescription, but a subscription, although I think it should be a prescription, to the Avi Nation magazine. Phenomenal. And this is for youth, by youth. He does an incredible job with this. And I'm very, very fortunate to know Jacob Peed. So if you're listening, Jacob, thank you very much. Tremendous. It's award-winning magazine. It's done great things. And with that, we'll see you in the open air.
Bye.